In the modern technological world we live in, we are constantly striving for increased cell phone reception, bigger and better television sets, improved radio reception, and a host of other electrical instruments we apparently cannot live without. Throughout all of this, we have become blissfully unaware of the extremely powerful force that is having a tremendous effect on our lives, an electromagnetic field that we cannot see and most of us cannot feel, but it is practically everywhere and is having a detrimental effect on our health. Because most of us cannot feel it, we tend to ignore it, but there are people who can feel it and whose lives have been badly affected by it. Vicky Benjamin was thrown into a journey of exploration when about 30 years ago she was diagnosed with a metastatic melanoma, a type of skin cancer that spreads throughout the body. At the time, she was living near a transformer building in her townhouse complex, had everything electric round her bed, electric blanket, television, digital clock radio, and a large computer nearby. She was soon to discover the hard way, the dangers of electricity, followed closely by the devastating effects that microwave radiation from cell phones, iPads, cell masts, and other transmitting and receiving devices have and are having on the human, animal, and insect species, as well as on the whole natural kingdom. By always asking the question, why, the story gradually unfolded.
It was in 1992, after struggling with cancer for so long, that my questions to why actually started becoming answered. And it was in that year that I started an awareness group in Johannesburg looking at the subject. A homeopath had lent me a book called Electro Magnetic Man, which certainly directed me towards the truth. At our first meeting, I asked Eskom to come and start telling us their side of the story. This led to my going overseas to a couple of international conferences where there were about 300 scientists all discussing the topic. And I realized how the truth was hidden from us. By 1994, cell phones were introduced, so no longer were we just looking at the problems affecting people from electricity in their homes, but now we were starting to get people using these huge bricks of cell phones, and from there on we started having people come with tumors, brain tumors that we'd never seen before.
In 2001, Andre van Rooyen bought this house in Glenmore, Durban, and moved in with his family. 5 years later, this cell mast was erected not far away, and almost immediately everyone in his family became ill.
At first, it started with myself and other family members waking up at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning and not being able to get back to sleep. We were all suffering with extreme anxiety, depression, and during the weekends when we were at home, we were constantly sleeping and tired. The anxiety and depression after around a month got to the point where I was even having thoughts of suicide. Then one night, whilst watching a National Geographic program on the effects of high voltage power lines on cattle, and that comments later in the program started making me think about the signs and symptoms that I was showing. I then started researching this online and found that thousands of other people around the world are suffering with exactly the same signs and symptoms where they were living near cell phone towers.
Andre went out to speak to his neighbors and found that they all had the same symptoms. There were a few people further up the road who had no symptoms, and Andre realized that their house was protected by higher buildings across the road from them.
My youngest son, who's 15 years old, was the least affected and was actually keeping the family together. He thought that we were all going crazy because he'd never seen us all being so depressed, anxious, continually fighting with each other, and he tried to keep the family together. Only after we realized that the cell phone tower radiation was the effect, I realized that he was the one that was not being affected, as his house was at the far end and furthest away from the cell phone tower, and that he had 5 walls blocking the radiation to his room. He was spending a lot of time in his room, as he did not want to spend time with us because we were always in a bad mood. At that point, when we realized that he was shielded by all the walls, we decided to move our sleeping quarters to the granny flat, which is at the back of our house, where we would be shielded by at least 7 walls, and where we all slept very well afterwards.
Andre did further research and discussed several screening options with an independent surveyor, but eventually decided to place sheets of aluminium against the wall and windows. Andre's maid Maureen, who has been with the family for many years, also noticed the effect of the tower.
When I'm ironing at the front house, I got headache and my eyes are very sore. When I'm at the back, no problem, no painful, nothing.
Unfortunately, our society has embraced this technology in a huge way. And the place where we're seeing the most suffering early on is in children. So we're starting with our attention deficit children. There are many studies now proving this. We've seen suicides near power lines. We're getting suicides near towers. Even children at school have committed suicide because the school wouldn't believe that they couldn't stand the environment that they were in. We have seen also many strange tumors in children, even on babies being born with tumors in their kidneys. And this is from mothers carrying cell phones that are switched on and having them in their handbags right next to the babies when they're in utero. Babies with birth problems are often put in incubators without the staff realizing the huge fields that are coming off fans, etc., in the incubators. And we've got well-documented studies on this. Newborn babies, when they come home from the nursing homes, are often placed on the other side of these huge houses and connect only with their parents via Wi-Fi radiation, baby monitors. And these are having a profound effect on children. So perhaps the answer here is to bring the baby much closer to the mother, as it's only the human species that actually pushes its baby away from the mother at birth.
Laura Taylor is a professional environmentalist. She bought a lovely home on a hilltop in Ilovo, Natal, and moved in with her 2 sons. Almost immediately, the whole family started suffering from headaches, back pain, and lack of sleep.
So one day, about 1.5 years after moving into the house, I was driving in the car with my son Matthew, and he said to me, "Mom, why are we always sick in this house?" And at the time I just said to him, "Matthew, I don't know." But about a couple of weeks later, I was waking up one morning and I heard Matthew's voice going through my head, and suddenly I thought, cell phone tower. My gosh, we live right next to a cell phone tower, and I've never thought about it before. And when it came to me, I then started to do research. And to cut a long story short, I got someone in to do measurements, and he advised us on how we could use various metal materials to actually protect ourselves, because it took me at least 6 months before I was actually able to sell the house and move to an area of lower radiation. But immediately the difference between protecting the house was that we could actually live there, and many of my symptoms actually became a lot better.
Laura now lives in a house in Ilovo where there is very little radiation.
When you describe the symptoms to a person sitting at a computer, they'll talk to you and say, but we've got most of these symptoms already. But it's actually what we call the dose-response ratio, how much a person gets and for what duration they get. But eventually the lack of sleep, which is a good indication, just not being able to get the brain down to the sleep frequencies, skin rashes, nausea, feelings of spaciness, especially around the forehead, upper chest near the thyroid gland. But eventually, with more and more exposure, we start getting genetic damage. And it's that is now seeing this unprecedented, massive increase in cancer cases today.
There are different levels of sensitivity in radiation. Colleen Kreser in Johannesburg has one of the highest levels possible. She first realized something was wrong when she was using a laptop computer and experienced severe pain moving from her hand to her shoulder. When she is upstairs in her home, she can feel when her husband comes home because he has his cell phone in his pocket and she can pick up the radiation. An aeroplane passing overhead causes intense pain, so she can never go to the airport. The work that she does often means going into offices and boardrooms with Wi-Fi and computers, so she needs to avoid that as much as possible.